Another edition of Newsline Live coming to you, of course, live and direct from our Newsfirst studios here in Colombo. Despite Newsline being a program that debates mostly political matters in Sri Lanka, we have been talking about matters that affect some of the most rural people in Sri Lanka as well. Today's show is dedicated to an issue faced by the farming community here in Sri Lanka. However, this cannot be just confined to the farming community alone, because an issue to the farming community in Sri Lanka that supplies food for you and I would definitely impact everyone here in Sri Lanka. To discuss these matters and more, we've got with us today Professor Saman Seneweera. He's an expert in the agricultural sector. A very good evening, Professor, and welcome to the show. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Sharlan, and it's a pleasure to come to your program. And
Thank you very much, Professor. Of course, I'm pretty sure the general public already knows the issue that we're about to discuss here. Recently, there was a ban announced on the import of inorganic fertilizer. Now, as Professor Saman would obviously explain to you in more detail, inorganic fertilizer has been used in Sri Lanka for quite a long time. It's used in many other countries as well. And overnight, the use or the import of inorganic fertilizer was banned. And if you have followed our news and the news that's happening, of course, here in Sri Lanka, you'd probably know that farmers are a little bit at odds with this decision, with the farmers not being able to secure the amount of inorganic fertilizer that they need. Professor, let's first, every story has a beginning, middle, and an end. So to keep this story in context, let's start at the very beginning. The agricultural sector in Sri Lanka. We have a history of over 2,500 years. We've been known as an agricultural nation. How have things, I'm pretty sure back in the day, they did not have inorganic fertilizer, but how have things evolved in the agriculture sector here in Sri Lanka, and how do we do things today?
So, the agriculture sector, especially come to the fertilizer area, chemical fertilizer area. The chemical fertilizer introduction happened with the Green Revolution. It's around 1950. So before, so totally the whole practices, agriculture, involved with the organic agriculture practices. So the reason why that development happened is that like there was a huge famine in the global world, and the technology developed to get out from that destruction. And so at the same time develop new varieties during the Green Revolution, and those varieties improved daily to achieve the higher yield potential. And over the years, last 70 years, these varieties we actually genetically fine-tuned. We brought a lot of traits into these varieties, especially the fertilizer responsive traits, disease resistant traits, then the other important traits to increase the yield potential, because there was a huge population on the earth. The population growth for Sri Lanka, for example, is a more than 50% population growth since the Green Revolution last 50 years. And there was no solution. That's the chemical fertilizer since then that drive the whole process, whole food security and this thing. And those are the factors today we are right now, we are, in fact, we are right now in just managing the country food security and the nutrient security. And so moving back to, again, to organic, the decision that the government taken to go into the total organic is quite challenging. I think we should look at to go for organic, and organic because that's very important, because our soil is heavily degraded. But moving into full organic direction is a very risky and very challenging, because we have developed the plant species, the plant cultivars with a very fine-tuned genetics that plants require a lot of nitrogen, because it's still nitrogen and the yield relationship is a linear. That's a simple example I give. So we cannot compromise those things, then if you compromise the yield there is a big yield drop will happen. That then we need to prepare for that one. And also biology, we cannot ignore, because they are a very special, we got this biology together, and the requirements of nutrient requirement is very precise, and also the plants require nutrients in a very, we need to manipulate those nutrients very precisely, like let's say flowering, let's say tillering of the plant, if you take example, and if you take a tea, to make the new leaf. So you need to trigger this thing, all this thing done by fertilizer. But if you go to organic space, is a organic fertilizer that does not have that capabilities. This organic fertilizers are fixed, the nutrient ratios are fixed. But through inorganic fertilizer, good thing, we can manipulate nutrient ratio. So what I overall suggest is a good initiative, but again, we really need to look at backed by science, and really, science play a big role, and basically we need to go together.
So today there was a letter sent to the President, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Agriculture, the Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture, by experts in the field of agriculture. These include the research institutes in Sri Lanka, the Tea Research Institute, the Paddy Research Institute, the Coconut Research Institute, so on and so forth, that have done extensive studies on these plants, how they react, how they respond, how they give their yield in the soil that they are sown in. And of course, in this letter, they have highlighted a number of concerns regarding the sudden import ban on inorganic fertilizer. With these concerns being highlighted, among these concerns is, of course, the compatibility of this and the transition of farmers from using inorganic fertilizer to organic fertilizer. Generally, let's speak in a global context. How many countries really do their agricultural activities 100% on organic fertilizer?
So, as far as I know, there's no country in the world that do have 100% organic practices. And so moving to 100% organic like the rest of the world is very much produce goes to a special market. And this is again a very big experiment if you go for 100% organic. And we have not seen similar thing, and if we do that experiment, we got to be very, very carefully, we need to do this experiment.
There are some people who believe that a switch to organic fertilizer is a step in the right direction. Are you a skeptic on that fact?
Yes, definitely. I am concerned, because I also the concern backed by a lot of plant scientists, agriculture scientists, and a lot of researchers in this agriculture space that this is they say that this is a risky decision, and rather I think we need to take a precautionary approach and start with the partial organification, and then do in combination with the chemical fertilizers. And so this process, what they suggest is we should go gradually, and then the issue is that there are a lot of things can be done before. Right now there are issues in a fertilizer use in the country. Not only fertilizers, agrochemicals. Agrochemicals, these are two things we cannot ignore. And especially when you come to the fertilizer. Fertilizer is the range of 18 more elements, and the plant knows one language. The language is inorganic language. The plant knows. So this is, even if you put as organic, is a plant, at least the transformation process need to go through in the soil, and then they provide as an inorganic inorganic ion or molecule. So that's how plant can absorb. Then the overall the back. Now what I said was the fertilizer use especially can cut down at least by 30 to 40%. There are a lot of the fine tuning can be done, especially in the use. I don't want to go to details. The letter had provided a lot of precaution, the measures to use, and technology we can adapt. For example, slow release fertilizers we can develop, and also site specific fertilizer use. In the world, rest of the world, they use site specific fertilizer that can be adapted and used. That means, so we provide only a nutrient requirement for the critical needs of the plant. In here is a blanket fertilizer recommendation is happening, and that's something, if you get out from that thing, and if you go for a site specific nutrient use, I'm sure that we can cut down 30-40%. There is a big space to improve the fertilizer use efficiency in the system, and that's where we need to put a lot of our money in that basket.
So speaking on the hardships that Sri Lanka will have to face in the transition from inorganic fertilizer to organic fertilizer, because already the policy decision has been made, and generally, not in the experience of Sri Lankan context, but internationally, when a policy decision is made, there's a lot of thinking that goes behind it, and the policy decision stays still for a considerable period of time. But now a policy decision has been made in Sri Lanka. How will this really affect you and I? Is it only the farmers who will struggle with getting a proper yield for their produce? Stay tuned. We will come back with that information. You're watching Newsline Live.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
Hello there, welcome back. You're watching Newsline Live. We're in conversation with Professor Saman, who is an expert in agricultural sciences. We're discussing the import ban on inorganic fertilizer, the practicality of this decision and how it will affect the lives of farmers as well as you and I. Before the break, we discussed the impact that this will have on the agricultural sector of Sri Lanka. And as we promised you before the break, now we will discuss the impact that this decision will have on the lives of everyday citizens here in Sri Lanka. Professor, why should everyday citizens really at least even care about this policy decision that will mainly affect the agricultural sector of Sri Lanka?
So this decision, if impact on the food and nutrient security in the country, because has a major impact on the country economy, because nearly 27% of the population of this country is directly involved with agriculture. Then nearly, when come to 50% around indirectly involved. The first priority should be the food security and nutrient security and their livelihood. If in case their farming income drop, they now is still struggling, like they cannot make a break even. And in that environment, if something happen, shake this whole dynamism of the agriculture economy, that will impact the whole country. In other side, for example, if you take rice, it has a direct impact on the food security. If you look at the import, the export crops like a tea, rubber, coconuts, etc., and the tea is the very unique brand name, a Sri Lankan brand name outside the world. And if we do not provide enough fertilizer, especially if you do not properly manage the nutrients, we cannot make the quality. We cannot create the quality of the tea that we need. And equally, to get the right yield, as I said in a few minutes ago, that the nutrient trigger is required. This is scientifically, for example, nitrogen, that to initiate that the new leaf, primordial leaves and so on, that nitrogen should goes into the system, that a specific dose, otherwise the plants will scientifically, will not be able to make those things. Those has a huge impact, impact on the quality, impact on the quantity, and the whole production process will be challenged. That's why I say is a very critical. It apply for say all other crops, the same principle in a different way, different magnitude, and different
Professor Ronasho, we do dedicate a certain amount of time to questions sent by our viewers. And of course, I've received one question. With this, we were raising concerns on the involvement of a certain other country to affect Sri Lanka's, to have an influence over Sri Lanka's food security. Now, this viewer is of the concern that Sri Lanka is already dependent on a number of other countries, more than Sri Lanka should be dependent, especially for funds, various other things, etc. This viewer is of the view that there is a certain other country also, I do not want to mention names, but there's a certain country involved in trying to influence the food security of Sri Lanka, so that in turn we will be dependent on that country.
So I personally, I had to give a personal opinion. I do not think, that way, but we need to, because it's in our hand. This whole thing, it's a matter of, we going with the 100% organic, or we go with the organic and inorganic and maintain our food security.
We can't blame another country because the decision is made by leaders that we elected. So technically, the decision is made by us.
That's exactly, the decision is made by us, and I don't think we should not be able to blame anybody, because it's very hard to pick up a person to blame.
So really moving on onto the practicality of 100% transition into inorganic fertilizer. What kind of statistics are we looking at? Do we really need the same amount of organic fertilizer to be replaced by inorganic fertilizer? Do we need a little bit less inorganic fertilizer when we do the switch? Because the policy decision has already been made. If we are to move forward like this, what will the switch be like?
So the issue is that to provide, I'll take as example in rice case. Rice required, for example, nitrogen required 210 kilogram of nitrogen per hectare of rice to cultivate, to achieve like a 5 tons yield. And if you want to provide organic or compost or organic fertilizer, so we need basically 5 tons of fertilizer. That is massive. The quantity is massive. And so again, there is a problem. The organic fertilizer does not have that same release characteristics. For example, urea you can provide and it's immediately available for the plant. But if you use organic fertilizer, so if it is immediately maybe 3%, it gradually, it does not synchronize with the plant demand, and that's the biggest problem. That's the science behind this whole problem, is a synchronization of the organic fertilizer. But in an inorganic case, we can manually interfere with the synchronizing.
And much of these plants that we cultivate today are not simply just, even if it's seeds of paddy or tea, rubber, these are not just seeds that are taken from the environment. They have been taken and manufactured in a way that would increase their yield, and these seeds do need a certain amount of instant nutrition, like you pointed out.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said was, these plants, again I'll take rice. The 70 years back, we never had the 5 metric tons yield potential, per hectare yield potential rice. But it was around 1 ton per hectare. But we got all the genetics into the plants, the genetics and the traits required to give into that yield potential. It happened over the years. It's not an overnight happened. And the is a very much the fertilizer dependent response, because the traits we got genetics into the plant is a very much fertilizer responsive traits. So that without that, the requirement, if we can't provide that nutrient requirement in the right rate at right time, so there will be very challenging to come into that yield potential.
One of the main reasons that authorities have pointed out in this whole switch, besides, of course, that food will be more healthier if we use organic fertilizer to cultivate the food, is also the fact that in many of these farming communities, a lot of the residents there are suffering with chronic kidney disease. And they say that, well, this chronic kidney disease is a huge causing factor, a huge trigger for this chronic kidney disease is the inorganic fertilizer that are used on those fields that gets added into their water supply, and they end up consuming it. We have a question from one of our viewers. Is there a risk like that? Is there proven facts that inorganic fertilizer causes kidney disease?
So there is, as far as I know, there is a no like validated there are like a proved the scientific evidence. There are there are work done, but the biggest problem here is that the mismanagement, that should not go. It's economically also wrong to, we should be, if the fertilizer use efficiency from the top is a if we lose the 40% of the fertilizer that we use, there is some problem. We should develop a recovery process, and equally, as far as I know, there is not the solid evidence to argue or support this connection between the diseases and there is a number of other hypotheses being floating around as well. Yeah.
Professor, there's another question from one of our viewers. In the event the executive, of course, changes their thought process and opts for a more phased out basis of transitionary period between inorganic fertilizer and organic fertilizer, technically to transition from this at a more phased out level, would you have any reservations against it?
No, that's what we exactly propose. Basically, is that there should be a phase out process. Like for, let's say, for example, we start with the 10% organic fertilizer, and then.
Currently, I mean, I'm sorry to question this. I don't know if you'd have the stat off the tip of your tongue, but how much organic fertilizer does Sri Lanka use right now?
Right now is 1% around organized.
1%?
Yes, somewhere around.
So we're talking
1%.
about a 99% change in a matter of days.
Yeah.
Also, we are in the final few minutes of this show, Professor, and I will make room for one more question that has been sent in by one of our viewers. The question goes like this: will Sri Lanka go into a period of famine by the end of the year?
So there is two things. This is a very critical issue. This thing, the whole managing the organic, managing nutrients. If we fail, if we do not interfere with our cropping, if you see the crops are at least visible in the deficiencies that we cannot provide organically, so then there will be the major issue. Then the interference, we need to intervene if we see, because it is also difficult because our crops are cultivated in a different in a season, like we don't have a very particular season.
Professor, when you said that Sri Lanka is going from a 1% use of organic fertilizer to a 99%, increase to 100%, that's a massive change. Has there been any pilot projects conducted on this matter? We see when the introduction of tabs, when the introduction of computer studies for schools go, there are always pilot projects to see how will this work, what are the shortcomings, how can we fix this. When we're talking about something as important as food security, has there been any pilot projects as far as your knowledge goes?
As far as I know, there was one project on a couple Department of Agriculture that was conducted in a Batalagoda Research Institute, Rice Research Institute. They had the compost, what's organic fertilizer versus inorganic, and they have always seen.
But we have not conducted a 100% organic fertilizer pilot project.
That's a 100% organic fertilizer pilot project. It's a small experimental project. Like we had not gone replicated across the country
At this such a large level. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us on our show. Unfortunately, time is up. I've received many more questions, but we will continue, of course, to monitor this situation as well, because it will affect the food security of the entire nation. On future programs on Newsline, we will continue to report on this. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us on our show and clarifying those matters to the general public. And thank you very much to our viewers out there who always tune in. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.
Thank you.